How do you rob the world's most secure diamond vault without triggering a single alarm? In February 2003, a small crew of Italian thieves walked into the heart of Antwerp's diamond district and pulled off what investigators still call the perfect crime that wasn't. By sunrise, more than $100 million in diamonds, gold, and cash had simply vanished. Cameras recorded nothing. Alarms never rang, and even the vault door appeared locked the next morning. This is how they did it, and how one small mistake destroyed everything. For months, they planned from the shadows, quietly watching, studying every habit inside the Diamond Center. But eventually, planning wasn't enough. It was time to move. The crew began with reconnaissance. They needed to understand the rhythm of the building, the guards, the weaknesses no one else noticed. And they learned something important. Security didn't fail because it was weak. It failed because it was predictable. So, on a night when the routine never changed, the thieves made their first move. They blended into the background. No masks, no weapons, nothing that would draw attention. Their plan depended on one thing: looking like they belonged. They slipped through the lobby as if they were tenants, then headed toward the elevator that led to the vault floor, far beneath the Diamond Center. This was the moment the heist truly began. When the elevator doors slid open, the crew stepped into a world almost no one ever saw. This underground level wasn't part of the public Diamond Center. It was a place built for silence, for steel, for control. Down here, everything felt colder. The air, the concrete walls, even the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz like a warning. The thieves knew the guard would return to this floor within minutes, but they also knew something the system never accounted for. This level had blind spots. For years, the same cameras watched the same angles, the same hallways, the same empty corners, in the same pattern. If the crew moved through the corridor at the exact second they'd planned, they would slip past completely unseen. But there was no room for hesitation. Any noise, any wrong turn, any moment off their timing, and the entire operation would collapse. Every step they took down that silent hall was calculated. Every shadow, every reflection on polished steel, every flicker of the security lights had been rehearsed for months. This is where preparation met reality. And the next few minutes would determine whether the greatest diamond heist in modern history would succeed or end before it ever truly began. The vault floor was protected by multiple layers of security, each one designed to stop anyone who didn't belong. But the crew didn't need to fight the system. They needed to understand it. The first obstacle was the magnetic sensor on the vault room door, a small device that should have triggered an instant alarm if the door ever opened even a fraction of an inch. Investigators later said this sensor was nearly impossible to disable. Nearly. The thieves placed a thin metal plate over the magnet, exactly matching its strength, so the system believed the door was still locked tight. Next was the thermal sensor inside the vault corridor, a device meant to detect body heat, but only if the temperature changed too quickly. So the crew moved slowly, very slowly, every step controlled, every breath measured. Then came the motion detector, a narrow cone pointed directly at the center of the hallway. It should have been unavoidable, but the thieves discovered its blind spot, a small strip along the far left wall. By pressing themselves against the metal panels and sliding forward inch by inch, they slipped past it completely unnoticed. Every system the Diamond Center relied on, every device meant to stop an intruder, had a flaw. And on that night, the crew exploited every single one of them. After slipping past the final sensor, the crew reached the vault room door, the last physical barrier between them and millions in uncut stones. This door wasn't like the others. It wasn't designed to keep out thieves. It was designed to intimidate them. A massive steel panel, nearly half a meter thick, bolts the size of a man's wrist, and a locking mechanism that seemed impossible to bypass. But the crew didn't need to crack the lock. They only needed to understand it. Investigators later discovered that the vault room door had a hidden flaw, a flaw no one expected, a flaw that was practically invisible. If the locking pins weren't fully extended into their housings, the door wasn't truly sealed. And on the night of the heist, the pins hadn't fully engaged. Security believed the door was locked. The system believed the door was locked, but in reality, it was resting on its frame. With a precise grip and steady pressure, the crew turned the handle. And without a single alarm, the vault room door opened. Inside the vault room, the silence was overwhelming. No alarms, no movement, just rows of metal lockers stretching across the walls. This wasn't a treasure chamber lined with gold. It was a practical space, cold, industrial, unforgiving. Each steel box held something different: diamonds, cash, documents, whatever the tenants believed was worth protecting. The thieves didn't waste a second. They moved with precision, opening box after box, working through the room like they had rehearsed it 100 times. Investigators later estimated that more than 100 deposit boxes were breached that night. Some boxes had been drilled open long before the heist. Others were cut with handheld tools the crew had smuggled in earlier, and some were simply pried open with raw force. What was inside amazed even the police: piles of loose diamonds, sealed envelopes of cash, bundles of foreign currency, and private documents that were never meant to be seen. Everything valuable disappeared into bags the crew carried with them, every movement quick, every action calculated. To this day, investigators still debate how much was taken. Some say 40 million, others believe it was closer to 100. But inside that vault, under dim fluorescent lights, the crew knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't guessing. They weren't hoping. They were executing a plan that had been perfected for months. With the vault room emptied, the crew knew they couldn't stay a second longer. Every extra minute inside the building increased the risk of discovery. But they didn't run. They didn't panic. They moved exactly the way they had rehearsed. Step by step, they retraced their route, sliding past the same blind spots, avoiding the same detectors they had bypassed on the way in. Down in the vault corridor, nothing looked disturbed. Nothing looked out of place. The cameras still believed everything was normal. The elevator ride back to the upper floors was the longest of their lives. 30 seconds of silence. 30 seconds where the entire plan could still collapse. But when the doors opened, the lobby looked just as it had hours earlier. A quiet room, a night guard on his routine, and a building that believed nothing unusual had happened. The crew walked out the same way they came in, calm, silent, invisible. Outside, the early morning streets of Antwerp were still empty. The sun hadn't risen yet. The cameras on the corners hadn't been checked. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the thieves were already gone. By the time the police arrived the next morning, the vault room looked like a war zone. Safety deposit boxes were torn open, documents littered the floor, bags, envelopes, and jewelry cases were scattered in every direction. Investigators stepped into the room with disbelief. This wasn't a subtle theft. This was a complete dismantling of the vault's interior. More than 100 boxes had been breached. Each one held something different: diamonds, cash, gold, private documents, and each one was emptied. The thieves hadn't rushed. They hadn't panicked. They worked methodically, carefully selecting what was valuable and leaving behind everything else. Forensic teams photographed every inch of the scene. They found broken locks, discarded containers, and piles of belongings left behind when time finally ran out. The vault was supposed to be the most secure space in the Diamond District, but in a single night, it had been stripped bare. Even veteran detectives said they had never seen a crime scene like it. It didn't look real. It looked staged, as if someone had recreated a disaster for a movie. But this was no movie. This was the aftermath of one of the most ambitious heists in history. For all their precision, for all their planning, the crew made one mistake. A mistake so small that investigators almost missed it. Deep inside the vault room, near one of the emptied boxes, police found a single item that didn't belong there. A black plastic bag, the kind used for carrying food, left behind in the chaos. Inside that bag was something even more unexpected. A piece of DNA. A trace so minor, so fragile, that it survived only because everything else in the vault had been destroyed. Forensic teams analyzed it, and the result pointed to a name investigators knew. A man already connected to smaller thefts in the Diamond District. A man who had vanished the morning after the heist. That tiny trace, that single overlooked item, became the thread that unraveled the entire operation. Once the evidence was processed, investigators began piecing together the timeline. They reviewed security footage, interviewed tenants, and cross-checked every access record in the building. But the Diamond Center had a problem. Most of the security system had been fooled. Cameras showed nothing, sensors recorded nothing, alarms remained silent. So detectives turned their attention to the one thing the thieves hadn't erased: their movements before the heist. Investigators examined weeks of surveillance footage from around the district, identifying the same silhouettes appearing near the building at unusual hours. They checked rental logs, hotel records, vehicle plates, and border crossings. Slowly, a picture began to form. This wasn't a random crew. It was a coordinated team with experience, discipline, and resources. And every piece of footage, every record, every offhand comment from witnesses began pointing toward a single group. A crew the police believed had been planning something big for a very long time. In the weeks that followed, investigators worked around the clock. Suspects were identified, interrogations were conducted, and the pieces of the puzzle slowly fell into place. Several members of the crew were eventually arrested. Others vanished before police could reach them. And one man, believed to be the mastermind behind the operation, disappeared completely. Authorities recovered a portion of the stolen goods, but most of the diamonds were never found. To this day, no one knows where they went or whether they were ever sold. Some investigators believe the stones were smuggled out of Europe within hours. Others think they were hidden away by the crew, waiting for the perfect moment to resurface. What everyone agrees on is simple. The Antwerp Diamond Heist wasn't just a robbery. It was a blueprint, a study in patience, observation, discipline, and precision. A crime so bold that even now, decades later, its full story has never been completely uncovered. And perhaps it never will be.